Member of the Antitrust Subcommittee, Senator Lee, followed by Senator Feinstein, and then Senator Hawley, Tillis, Cornyn, and Cruz. We'll try to go back and forth. And Senator Cotton. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to commend my colleagues, Senators Klobuchar and Grassley, for their work on this issue. Self-preferencing and other potentially anti-competitive behavior within the big tech industry has been a concern of mine for many years. In fact, it's been a concern that I've focused on ever since I first arrived in the Senate and was assigned at the Judiciary Committee back in 2011. When I was one of the first Republicans to openly challenge Google's behavior in the marketplace. It was likewise a big concern of mine when I chaired the Antitrust Subcommittee hearing on self-preferencing in the last Congress, and it very much remains a concern of mine today. All this is to say that I share many of the goals of the authors and the co-sponsors of the bill. And I was a little surprised a moment ago to hear from the sponsor that those who have filed amendments, as I have, are seeking only to thwart the bill and have no desire, no intent, no willingness to work with the authors in order to make it better, to improve it to the point where we could vote for it. That does not describe my position at all. I do think there are issues, and I think if we can address those issues in ways that are sustainable, that would address the problem meaningfully, I'd love to get to yes, and I've been trying to figure out ways that I can do that. But I'm not there yet. We're not there yet. This bill isn't there yet. And I respectfully don't believe that we should be passing this bill out of committee. Let me explain what I mean. I've got some serious concerns with the legislation as it's now written. As well-intentioned as it might be, it's still got some issues. Specifically, I worry a lot about the broad scope and the vague language that it contains that I believe would lead to an untold number of unintended and unforeseen consequences, like harming many of the very same consumers that we're trying to protect. I also worry that quite perversely, and however unintentionally, it may actually entrench the very four companies at which it's aimed by creating a strong incentive to simply cease doing any business with third parties. This could crush thousands of small businesses, and it could actually worsen the state of competition in online markets. And I know that is not the intent of the bill, but we've got to be very careful when we do this to make sure that we're not creating more of the same problems that we're trying to address. That's why we hold hearings. That's why we hold markups. That's why we propose amendments. That's why we really have to understand legislation and all of its implications before we pass it out of this committee. It's our job. And this committee has historically, certainly throughout the duration of the 12 years I've been here, it's always aspired to be very thorough. Of all the committees on which I serve, and I like all my committee assignments, but I especially love this one. One of the reasons for that is that across the aisle, across the political spectrum, there's a strong desire among members of this committee, Democrats and Republicans alike, to make sure that we're thorough. And it's important because a lot of what we do really has very far-reaching implications. This bill is no exception to that. And we owe those we serve that duty of being thorough. So, look, I'm committed to stopping big tech's manifestly anti-competitive, unjust, and abusive behavior. And it is all of those things, all of them. But I can't do it in good conscience in a way that risks such collateral damage as this bill presents. I can't. I'm also really concerned about the lack of scrutiny that this bill has received. And these two things are connected. You see, when it gets more scrutiny, when it has more coverage by us, we can know with a greater degree of certainty whether, to what extent, in what ways, this will cause unintended but very harmful consequences. Now, just to be clear on something, because it's been suggested that this has gotten the coverage that it needs. That's just not true. I wish it were, but it's not. And frankly, it shows. It shows in the end product. To date, we have had no legislative hearing on this bill. Not one. This, notwithstanding the fact that it's got a novel approach, it's got ambitious goals, it's innovative, which are all things that are great, but suggest all the more reason for us to have a degree of scrutiny over it with actual hearings. And no public answers have been provided in response to the various questions, serious questions, I would add, that have been posed by a number of our colleagues and by concerned citizens and by experts in the field of competition law. While the Antitrust Subcommittee held 8 hearings last year, and they were great hearings, not a single one of those 8 hearings, not one, was focused on this legislation. If we had had one, we have a great spirit of comedy and collegiality on that one, I would have gladly agreed to it, would have welcomed it. Still would. We still need one. We didn't have any. Now, although the bill was mentioned on occasion, mentioning a bill at a hearing is not the same as having a hearing in which you thoroughly analyze the implications of legislation. Now, the discussion in those hearings where it was mentioned was confined essentially to perfunctory statements of approval by a handful of handpicked majority witnesses. So, I mean, that's fine. Everyone's allowed to do that in a hearing, to have people say nice things about a bill that we've introduced. I don't have any objection to that. But what I do object to is the suggestion that we have somehow held a hearing on this because the bill has been referenced favorably by handpicked witnesses, albeit witnesses who have not in any way presented the bill as if in a legislative hearing. Sadly, this isn't surprising, as there's much about this bill that we still don't know. It may stop some anti-competitive behavior, but at what cost? How much pro-competitive behavior might get caught into the net too? How much pro-competitive behavior could we save and preserve while still pursuing effectively the anti-competitive behavior that we're talking about if we took a little bit more time and made sure that the provisions were ironed out more cleanly in a more well-thought-through fashion? Will the bill result, as drafted, in the removal of popular products and services that have benefited consumers? How will the interoperability requirements impact cybersecurity and privacy? Will judges interpret the bill to protect consumers or individual competitors? This is an important question, given that U.S. antitrust law, our competition policies in this country, have always focused, to our great benefit, on protecting competition itself, protecting competition with an eye toward protecting the consumer. The minute we start focusing on competitors rather than competition and consumers, the minute we could really end up with a very different product. And I just think we have to be careful about doing that. Doesn't mean that there's never an opportunity to revisit the way we're doing things, but we do have to be cautious. And this does represent a pretty major shift. Which companies will be covered by the bill in the future? And why aren't they covered now? Why are U.S. companies put at a disadvantage relative to foreign competitors? Will the bill help, or will it worsen the type of censorship that we've come to associate, some of us perhaps more than others, with big tech? It's maybe a little bit harder to grasp this concept unless you've experienced it firsthand. That there is censorship there, censorship of the sort that itself reflects an absence of adequate competition in this industry, and it does need to be addressed. Will 2-day shipping turn into 7 to 12-day shipping? Questions about specific examples have been met more or less with the reply, look, we trust the government to bring good cases under this law. This response doesn't satisfy me. In fact, it should terrify any member of the United States Senate. What's more, the penalties imposed by the legislation are disconnected from the harm that they seek to discourage, rising to as much as 15% of a company's total revenue. And keep in mind, that money isn't even going to consumers, not even going to the victims of the behavior in question. Instead, it'll just line government coffers. In any law, penalties really should be tied to harm. Abandoning this approach, as this bill does, may actually result in fewer attempts to offer consumers new and better products and services at better prices. I don't see how this helps innovation or choice online to take the approach that I've just described. Now, on top of all these practical concerns, I do have some philosophical concerns with granting executive branch agencies sweeping new power and expansive discretion to reshape markets, to redefine them. This has never once worked out in the past. Never, ever. And I see no reason why it would work now. And so, to my fellow Republicans on the committee, I'd ask, what do we gain? What do we gain here by giving deep state bureaucrats control over big tech? What do we gain when we do that? And why not insist that in addition to anything else we might do to promote competition in this area, why don't we also insist that whatever else we do in this area is accompanied by some genuine effort to address the censorship problem, which we uniquely have felt and are feeling every single day. The Republicans on the committee know exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly what they've wanted all along, not to break up big tech to protect us, but to control it and to use it against us. We can't hand the keys to big tech over to radical ideologues, more concerned with power and control than they are with prosperity and economic freedom. And yes, I'm talking about the FTC. At the same time, it's not enough for Republicans to simply be the party of no. We need to offer our own solutions. That's one of the many reasons why I've introduced a number of amendments to this bill. I've offered those and other suggestions to the bill's sponsors previously, and I'm offering a number of them today. And no, this is not an effort by me to say we don't need to do anything. It's not an effort by me to simply kill this bill because I disagree with the need to address things in this area. No, I'm just doing my job. I'm doing it thoroughly because I believe strongly in the adage that we've got to first do no harm. And in order to ascertain whether we're doing harm, we've got to understand the legislation. This thing has not received the airing that it needs. Look, with all that in mind, in addition to my ongoing legislative efforts, including with some bills that I've filed over the last few months and years to address big tech censorship, conflicts of interest in digital advertising, and overall antitrust reform, I intend to offer a number of amendments to this bill to help us achieve our common goal. I look forward to their consideration by this committee. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, could I
Mr. Chairman.
respond? I'm sorry. Could I respond?
Well,
I'll let Senator Klobuchar respond and then recognize Senator Feinstein.
Thank you. I'm going to make this brief because I know there's other senators that want to speak. But Senator Lee, you and I have had a long time friendship, and I want to correct some things for the record because I'm actually kind of shocked by some of the things you said. First of all, you just said that it was a perfunctory hearing only with majority witnesses that perfunctorily said they supported the bill. I'd like to put on the record, Mr. Chair, a letter from your own witness, Senator Lee, from that hearing in December, who said he supported the bill. That would be the professor from the University of Notre Dame, Roger Alford. So what you said was incorrect. It wasn't just majority witnesses from that hearing that supported that bill. Your own witness supported the bill. All right?
Thank you.
Secondly, the bill was first introduced in the House, a version of it, last June, following a 16-month investigation by the House Judiciary Committee's Antitrust Subcommittee into the state of competition online. You'd have to have your head in the sand if you didn't know that was going on. And if you haven't read those reports that Representative Buck, a friend of yours, worked on for a long, long time, then I suggest that you do. They're very disturbing. That investigation included 7 congressional hearings, the production of nearly 1.3 million internal documents, and communications submissions from 38 antitrust experts and more than 240 interviews. Here in the Senate, the bill and the topics that we have been discussing have been thoroughly explored, as Senator Grassley has explained. We've had 4 separate hearings related to this topic of discrimination. In my opening statement, I actually went through a number of pieces of testimony from witnesses, small businesses, big businesses, individuals that supported this bill and the reason we introduced this bill. There was one in 2021, just in 2021, 4 ones. One on app stores on April 21st, one on connected home tech on June 15th, one on big data on September 21st, and one on innovation on December 15th. That's a hearing where your own witness said he supported this bill because this bill was the subject of the discussion of this hearing at length. In April, we held a hearing about the monopolies in the App Store market. As I said at the hearing, just because a company creates a successful, innovative business that consumers like doesn't give it a free pass to harm competition or ignore our antitrust laws. In June, I told witnesses from Amazon and Google that as those companies expand their connected home device offerings and it gets a bigger and bigger market, I have concerns about your incentives to preference your own connected devices over competing products. This was discussed by several senators. And I asked them, given some of the other self-preferencing we've seen in other aspects of the tech business, why shouldn't we be concerned? And the witness from Sonos, who I've already quoted, a smaller connected speaker company, also talked about this concern. In September, we held a hearing on the control that the big tech platforms have on user data. Charlotte Slayman from Public Knowledge testified about self-preferencing behavior by digital gatekeepers. I could go on and on about every hearing, and Mr. Chairman, I will put a document in the record. We introduced the bill last October. That is months and months ago. Since that time, as I said, my staff and I have worked closely with Senator Grassley and his staff, and together they have spoken to at least 40 different stakeholders about the text of the bill. We have also heard from 21 state attorney generals, 21 state attorney generals, including from California, North Carolina, Tennessee, Nebraska, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Hawaii, Iowa, Louisiana, Rhode Island, Utah, and Minnesota, applauding our efforts to update the bill, our law, to take up the bill, including the ones we are considering today. I've had dozens of conversations with my fellow members of this committee about the bill, and our staff has had dozens more. And since we are talking about numbers, let's put out a few others. Apple is worth $2.7 trillion. Alphabet, Google's parent company, is worth $1.8 trillion. Amazon is worth $1.6 trillion. And Facebook, now known as Meta, is worth $885 billion. Microsoft is worth $2.2 trillion. These are five of the 10 most valuable companies in the world. Yes, we're proud of it. But at some point, when we are dealing with companies of that size, I don't think it is a surprise that it is not easy to finally put some rules of the road. And if you want to know why we have done absolutely nothing in this building for 20 years on this topic, I think that pretty much answers it. So I have worked very carefully with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to make sure that this bill is sensible and it does something. But if we want to be serious about making sure that we're not just relying on the past in how we deal with monopolies based on laws from 100 years ago, then we are going to have to do something about this. And I think this is a good beginning, and it doesn't get at a lot of the concerns that have been raised about other bills, and that's why we're starting with this legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Put a statement in the record on the same points that she made about the process.
Senator Grassley, without objection, will be allowed to enter a statement in the record.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to respond.
If you just withhold for just 1 minute, if we're going to get to the point where we're going to actually offer amendments, I hope we do, we ought to be thinking about the debate